Hi, welcome to our broadcast. Welcome from the frozen tundra that is Tallahassee. There's still snow on the ground, so it's kind of an event up here. But we're here on a Friday and we're here to talk GIS. So I just want to take care of some housekeeping items very quickly. This event number, write it down, but I will be sending a follow-up email with all of the information I'm about to disclose. The event number is 930-1160. It's good for one AICP CM. If you click on the top of your menu, you click the More button and open up the Materials folder, you'll see two downloadable PDFs. Our guests today have made their presentation downloadable for you, and then they also have a handout available for you that has some resources that they're going to refer to during their presentation. So let's get this started. I'm going to hand it over to Matt Davis from Florida Technical Consultants, who's going to be your tour guide today. Enjoy. Thank you.
Everyone, my name is Matthew Davis, and I'm here with Amelia Alman and James Barton, who's to my left. You can't see him in the screen, but he is here with me as well. Today, we're going to be taking a look at how AI, or artificial intelligence, for those who are kind of just being introduced to this, can enhance ADA compliant, which is the American Disability Act compliancy, with GIS solutions. So this talk that we're going to work through today is really largely focused on a particular use case and problem that we were encountering in our area in South Florida that we wanted to build a solution for. So a little bit about myself. So I've worked in Ontario, Canada, and South Florida. Predominantly been an urban designer with a focus on smart cities over the years. And then my counterpart here, Amelia, is trained in New York City and focused a lot of efforts on industrial redevelopment as she grew her career and is now obviously utilizing technology to help resolve planning related problems. So for today's agenda, very quickly, we're going to tackle what ADA compliance is, how we look at methodological approaches within this particular challenge, what we designed as a 5 principle focus based on what we can gather from how other people are resolving ADA compliance, looking at issues and solutions, and then going through an AI tool sample demo that will allow you to see the product in existence. So why is ADA compliance so important? Anecdotally, there's kind of a narrative or a storyline that if you go to Google, you'd be able to kind of really quickly truth it out from resource perspective. But ADA compliance is critically important because it has created quite a bit of a legislative push to ensure that everybody has equal access to information in a way that is accessible for everyone to gain insights from, to integrate with, to utilize, to look at, to view, and to read. So when we think about ADA compliance, one of the challenges that we've seen throughout South Florida is the issue around the contemplation of what would happen if you're not ADA compliant. So there's a bit of a narrative that has resulted in local municipalities being engaged in legal scenarios or litigious scenarios, which is making them exposed to basically legal action from a city perspective. So there's kind of a real world scenario, and then there's a more practical scenario, which is that the internet and generally digital tools often can become restrictive or become difficult to access as a result of not being transferable amongst different audiences. So when we look at ADA compliance, and Amelia will give you quite a bit of background as to how we've kind of gotten here and where we're going with ADA compliance as a whole in industry. But the kind of main narrative that we look at is how do we make it so that everybody can utilize tools that are of value in either the development of the planning process or in a way to participate in the planning process, right? So we want to reduce those barriers to entry from a technical developer perspective, as well as on through to a person from the public who wants to be involved in that land planning process.
All right, so what is ADA? ADA stands for the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it was passed in 1990 under the Bush administration. And it's a federal civil rights law under the Bush administration to protect a broad range of disabilities, including physical, and mental disabilities, and also includes protection to access of digital information. So anything shared publicly by a city or any government agency has to be ADA compliant. So there are web content accessibility guidelines, also developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, also known as W3C. And these are internationally recognized standards for accessibility. These are really more about visual accessibility. So there are 3 different tiers for WCAG, as it is also called. There is level A, which is considered the basic accessibility, level AA for strong accessibility, and level AAA for excellent accessibility. So level A is pretty basic. It just states that you cannot rely on color alone to convey information. Double A is a little bit more in depth in what it means by not just using color to display information and provide information. So you have to meet a 4.5 to 1 contrast for regular text and a 3.3 to 1 for larger text, which is bigger than 18 point, and a 3 to 1 contrast for any other elements. AAA is a 7 to 1 contrast for regular text and a 4.5 to 1 for larger text and any elements as well. So the Department of Justice points to level AA and above for its conformance any conformance to the ADA compliance. So if in the case that Matt was mentioning about any, cases coming to fruition, they would kind of assess and make sure that any information meets the minimum standard for AA. So a contrast of 4.5 to 1 for regular text. So that is that. Some important dates to remember here are that by April 24th, 2026, all public entities with a total population of more than 50,000 will have to comply to these standards and regulations provided under the ADA Act. And by April 26, 2027, public entities with a total population of less than 50,000 will have to comply. And you can find more information about these rules and regulations in the Americans with Disabilities Act Title II regulations, subpart H, which goes over web and mobile accessibility, particularly section 35.200, which will go over these dates that I just mentioned here and give you more details about them. So starting off our kind of research into pre-existing examples of ADA compliance, we were looking to see if any other organizations had gone through kind of this process that we're going to go through now, and maybe make some guidelines as to how to make maps more ADA compliant for governments specifically. We came up a little short in our research. Really, the one that I found that was the closest to what we were looking for was through the Minnesota government, where they provided guidelines on accessibility for static maps. But even these still were more just about how to add alternative text in the back end after creating a map, and less about requirements for color contrast and symbology and how to present these maps in a way that someone with a visual impairment would be able to still understand information on a map. So we kind of went through the Americans with Disabilities Act regulations as well as the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines to formulate our own, what we deem, guidelines for design elements while going through our maps to make sure that they meet ADA requirements. So we're going to go through an example here. This is our original map template that we're going to upgrade and make it ADA compliant. So this map is from Dania Beach. It is their development map, so they were tracking developments in different stages in their city. So we can see here that we have different statuses labeled. We have building permit review, site plan approval, and under construction, and these are just symbolized as different colors. And underneath the WCAG color contrast guidelines, we can't just symbolize by color alone because that does not convey information in an ADA compliant way. So as you can see on this map, the colors are contrast-wise do not meet the minimum standards because they blend in with the background. The labels are really hard to distinguish and the boundary as well. So we have to go through and we're going to make some updates to this map. So our 5 principal design elements are contrasting symbology, distinguished labels, clear boundary lines, a dampened maze map, and then also adding in alternative text. So to begin, we're going to go through contrasting symbology. So our symbols cannot rely on color alone, and we wanted to preserve the city colors, so additional graphics needed to be added. So in this example now, you can see that the symbols that we used have a little bit more texture involved in them. So we have hatching, so that even if you cannot see the colors, the city colors that we used, you can still identify what status each of these developments belongs to based on the way that the lines kind of go in each of the symbols. So perpendicular would be building permit review, and then a hash would be site plan approval. So even if you can't see the colors, you'd still be able to understand what each status is for this map. Next would be distinguishing labels. So our previous labels, as you see here, blend in with the base map. So our new labels have a little bit more layers in terms of halos in the background so that they are more distinguished. You can more easily see now which label is referring to which project here, and it meets the minimum contrast requirements, so it no longer blends in. We also needed to determine clear boundary lines. So in this example, the boundary lines are very faint and very hard to kind of separate the background from the foreground. So when we update it, we could see a little bit better the distinguishment from the boundary lines. We also changed the symbology of each of the boundaries. So before, both the CRA boundary and the city limit were the same kind of dashed line. So to distinguish those in case someone couldn't see the color difference, we also added in different elements of lines so that without color, you could still distinguish whether you're looking at the CRA boundary and the city line boundary. We also went through and we dampened our base map so that we could draw more focus on the elements that we wanted to show forefront. So previously we had been using aerials and putting them at a 40% transparency, and now we increase that transparency just to draw focus on the city itself rather than the outside areas that weren't as important to this map. So some considerations that we had to go through while making these updates and these changes were basically putting ourselves in another person's shoes, asking ourselves what we consider to be ADA compliant, going through those guidelines, and then how our map should look to individuals of all different abilities and disabilities. So the one thing that I like to do while going through this process, and I did this multiple times throughout the process to see what it would look like, is I went through and I viewed each of the maps in black and white. So if someone with a person with visual impairments, including color blindness, I wanted to see how elements may look to them without, without being able to see colors. So this is our original example that we started with. I viewed it in black and white, and I saw that our colors really blended in with the background. So you couldn't really see which parcels were being called out for developments or not. And then I did this again with our updated version, and I did this multiple times in between to kind of tweak things as we went. And now you can see that even in black and white, you can still understand information from this map, understand what status everything is at without needing any of the colors. And that's kind of our end goal over here. After we were happy with the new updates to our map in terms of design elements, we went through and we added alternative text. So we exported our map and we took it into Adobe. So very similar to what was outlined in the Minnesota.gov information on how to add alternative text to a map is kind of what we did. And that link is also provided to you within our handout as well if you want to download that and view that information. That's provided to you. So now this map is readable to anyone who completely cannot see it. They could still get information from it and understand what they're supposed to be seeing. So a few pinch points that we kind of went through during this process was that it was very time consuming to go through, make updates to these maps, finding out the symbology, figuring it out, but also if any changes needed to be made, it was not very editable. We would have to go through the whole process again, update our data, export the map again, and then go through the process of Adobe Acrobat to add in the alternative text, which is not necessarily user-friendly. There's a lot of different areas that you have to kind of go through to add an alternative text into Adobe Acrobat. So that definitely made it more time-consuming to make updates to if it was a map that needed to be updated quite frequently, which in this example, the development statuses would be changing constantly every quarter. So it would have to be edited on a more frequent basis, making it a little bit more time consuming. So these are our pinch points. And our necessities going forward, we really needed a streamlined workflow, an easier editing capability so that we wouldn't be running into these very time consuming processes of editing our maps and re-exporting them, adding in the alternative text. So we came to this idea of AI as a possible solution for these pinch points. And I'm going to hand it over to Matt.
And if there's any questions, I see Patty's made a comment here. If you could add them to the question box, we can certainly engage at the later part of this. So the intent of this session is to actually get discussing the particular topics as we move through them. So please feel free to ask as many questions as you like, and we'll engage with them at the end of this session. So as Amelia is saying, basically the problem statement is there's a lot of legislation. It's not really particularly founded in an enforcement mechanism, is more so of an encouragement mechanism. So the idea being, we want to certainly encourage, and then later on there would be an enforcement with that date and deadline approaching. But as you can imagine, if you're a GIS person, or even if you're a planner who's utilizing technology, you can imagine that there's a tremendous time constraint and knowledge gap to close as it relates to ADA, right? What is it? How do I use it? How do I make sure I'm not wrong on it? How do I ensure that I'm kind of staying in line with industry and so on? So what we saw and what we continued to see were a series of more problem statement focused rather than solution statement focused. And then there was a scalability problem that we began to encounter. And one of the things that, like I was mentioning, is that we went through and did this for a particular case study at the city of Dania Beach, and when we were complete with the particular process that we engaged in, we submitted for an award, and it won an award with the Florida Planning and Zoning Association for innovation. And this next segment is really where the innovation kicks in. So the first kind of component when we evaluate it is really about legislative alignment and ensuring that the technology meets the minimum requirements and ensures that everybody can be best enabled. But again, that's really throttled down to either a person's knowledge base or a person's ability to execute on that knowledge base from a technical perspective. So baking in or writing down any particular elements that are ADA compliant, and make it so that that document, when submitted to a digital environment, is ADA compliant in a way that is successful for everybody to integrate. Now, all of that being said, obviously with that knowledge problem and the scaling problem, we looked to, and coincidentally, it was kind of in a growth period, the opportunities inside of artificial intelligence. Largely, we know that we can send all of our knowledge base into this tool set. We can self-train it, and we can make it so that everybody can kind of access it. So as it sits right now, and as we move forward through this, one of the things I'd like to note is that you can do and use this tool through the handout QR code that you have access to right now. And it's entirely free. Everybody can use it. There's no restrictions on it. So when we think about the ADA compliance, there's essentially two development patterns that we can consider. One is the creation of a new digital product that is going to be placed on a website, and then the other is an existing paper product that would need some form of transposition or translation into ADA compliancy. So in, say, scenario one, you've developed a map product and you need to put it in an online environment for the public to be able to see it or to utilize it or to become part of the planning process. And then in the other environment, perhaps you still are printing your products and you have it so that the public can walk into your office and they can view maybe a planning application or the like. They can use this tool in either a mobile environment or in a digital environment as a consumer, so that this consumer could open this and as maybe a member of the public. They could open this application, use it, and it'll go through and translate it to an ADA compliant standard on their behalf. Then in addition to that, you as a designer, so a technology designer, whether you're a GIS person, you can use it to go through and create the output that you're expecting that you could then integrate into your products. So we'll move to the next slide here quickly. So there's if anybody's familiar with ChatGPT or AI models as a whole, there's effectively two approaches in industry right now. One is an approach that allows you to go and access maybe something. One of them is called Claude. Another one that we're looking at today is called ChatGPT. And those are large language models that are accessible largely by the public. They use a cohort knowledge base and they're accessed on a kind of one-to-one basis. But as you feed it information, it self-reflects and then takes that information, collates it, and feeds it into its own model for training in the future. Then there's a second pipeline, which is that you can self-train your own large language model and be a little bit more restrictive in its capabilities and a little bit more defined in the output expectations. In this case, we've taken a model of the kind of base foundations of ChatGPT, and we've hyper focused it using some of our knowledge base that we gained over time in our own self research, and we've allowed it to grow and go through iterations. This is, I think, version 2.1, so that means there's version 1.0, 1.1, so on and so on and so on. And this iteration that we're at right now is obviously ever expanding as the model expands. So the knowledge base increases over time. But the core foundation of our methodology when we look at AI implementation is one very specific workflow. So we have, whether you're using a mobile environment, whether you're a consumer, or whether you're a staff member, we have it set up that it looks at the full extent of the thing, in this case, the map, and then it scans for we'll call hierarchical levels. So the very first hierarchical level is based on traditional cartographic standards. So it's going to look for title block, it's going to look for dates, scales, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to look at the legend thereafter. And it's going to begin to then interpret inside of the image after it gets past the title block. And the way in which it does that, it breaks it down into quadrants. So we take the map image and we break it into a quadrant, and we begin at the northwest quadrant, northeast quadrant, southwest quadrant, southeast quadrant, etc. And on the image that may be backwards, but my hands were in the right spot. Then from there, what it will do is it will collate the information that it captured from that image, and it will begin to assess based on the legend along the bottom, as well as contextualize against the information that we have in the title block, and it'll look at the map and go forward. Then once it's completed that process, essentially what it's going to do is it's going to provide two key outputs. The very first output is going to be what we would consider to be ADA compliant descriptions, right? So you'll see here, if we look at the image on the screen, it's going to decipher the title. And I guess maybe to articulate the workflow, what we didn't want to do is go through a specific live demo, but I would encourage you, you could do this while I'm talking. You could just take a PDF image that you have from a map. You can take a picture of a map and you can upload it if you have mobile. It's entirely up to you. But from here, what you'll see it will do is it will open this PDF, it'll interpret it, and it'll begin to capture the information. So in this case, we first capture the general information, as we call it. So the title block, the date, the scale, the legend, etc. Then it goes on to look at the key features. So as you can see here, it's going to look at, in this case, this map has a very specific color-coded system. It has boundary lines that are on here. It has landmarks, so a specific piece of information that would be cartographically important. And as well, it has points of reference. So it knows the street names and so on and so on and so on. So we've spent a pretty significant amount of time ensuring that when a user engages in this GPT model and actually puts their image into it, it's going to go through very methodically in this particular workflow to design a particular output that is repeatable. Ultimately, as you can imagine, what you want to do is you want to ensure that your output is consistent. Because if you have an inconsistent output, and this does happen where it kind of goes astray with GPT models. So if your output becomes inconsistent because it's maybe has a biases in one particular direction that day, or maybe you've asked the question in an unclear manner, it can result in a degradation of your speed and degradation of your quality of work. So this is repetitive, and as we move through versions, we actually enhance it to be, so if we're in version 2.2, we would enhance it and then articulate those enhancements that have gone through there. And then after that, it goes through observations and recommendations. So this is where if if you want to know opportunities for improvement from an ADA compliance standard, you can simply just go through this process and it will tell you where there's opportunity to improve, right? So in this case, there's one recommendation on text contrast. There's another recommendation on color as for the plat in this instance. So it's saying it lacks sufficient contrast. There's another recommendation for boundary line, maybe being yellow-brown currently, does not provide enough color contrast, and in fact should be a darker color boundary line to enhance visibility. And I think the key thing to note here is the first component is repetitive. It'll always be substantially similar. The observation and recommendation is actually endlessly scalable. So if you've loaded in an image that is maybe 0% ADA compliant, if we were to put in a percentage rating, it would give you a very large list of opportunities and enhancements that you could then make to make it even more ADA compliant. And then the expectation is you can iterate yourself through those solutions. So you could go through and say, okay, I've changed it from yellow brown. You don't have to say this, but you could just make the change from yellow brown to maybe a darker yellow or a darker brown or whatever the case may be. And you could upload your new image and it would then give you recommendations based on that new iteration. But it would also be self-aware enough to know the enhancements you've made. So without you even have to engage in it, it's actually going to capture that because that's what we've been training it to do in the background. So the expectation is that there's one output that you could literally just copy and paste into your PDF. Internally, we have a mechanism where we actually just email it and it can take it and decipher it and send it back to you. And that's kind of in the very final stages of full production. Once we get there, we feel free we'll share it with everybody. But that's a little bit more of a desirable workflow because it gives us the opportunity to move a little bit quicker than engaging with the AI in every single instance where we're having like ChatGPT open on the side and then making the enhancements and so on and so on. So we believe it's going to increase the intuitive nature of kind of moving through this particular iteration. Then beyond that, those observations or recommendations will kind of constantly be shifting based on industry input and expectations. Yeah.
If anyone's having trouble opening up the PDF, there's also the QR code right here that you can just scan, and I'll leave it up for a minute so that anyone can scan it at their own will.
And I don't see any questions. Patty, I'm not sure if you've gotten any questions on your end. We'll just wait a moment in case they're coming in and we can't see them. If there aren't any questions, then I would encourage everybody to play around with this and utilize it to its fullest extent. It's got a great opportunity. One of the things to note when we do an enhancement, we actually we train the AI to reroute you into the newer version. So if you do submit and we've got a newer version, it'll take the newest version and it'll send you over to the newer, up-to-date one.
Hi, I'm not seeing, somebody just asked, is this tool publicly accessible? And you've answered that question. I replied to everyone. I'm going to give a couple more minutes for folks to submit questions, but I just have a question as somebody who's not very familiar with ChatGPT or AI. What's the best way to go forward in getting familiar and use and comfortable and maybe build up a little bit of confidence before you start doing this?
Certainly, and that's a really, really good question. It's one of the more common questions, right? So as you can imagine, Amelia and myself are sitting here every day, all day, kind of engaging in these more modern technologies, but it can be very overwhelming on arrival when you start to look at these technologies and start to use them in a way that's beneficial. And the easiest way to consider that, I think, at least right now, is it's a tool that's here to help you, and there are obviously going to be limitations, and there's going to be this kind of overwhelming nature inside of it because of the large size of the knowledge base. But ultimately, if you could think of maybe asking a toddler a question, right? So if you strip down the nuances of the English language, or you strip down those subtleties that would occur in how we kind of all talk to each other, where there's a kind of implicit design in how we would be expecting a result, maybe I would, nod my head. A computer's not going to understand well, I mean, it does, but it's not going to understand for the point of this conversation what is being expected as an output. So I think the biggest way to utilize any AI model currently is to ensure you have a problem statement and an expected outcome, and then to kind of keep iterating through that problem statement to your expected outcome. This way, you have a control at the front and a control at the end. Alternatively, without that control mechanism, you could end up in a completely different world of thought. So, as an example, one of the things I've seen over the years in engaging in AI is you can begin to engage with it, and if you say add maybe a colloquialism, it immediately can get confused, and this has since improved, but it could immediately get confused and send you down a completely different pathway. And that divergent pathway then becomes the new base knowledge that it begins to test against. So imagine you've got this knowledge base, and then you've kind of passed through in time, and you hit a new benchmark point, and then you have a new knowledge base. Well, what will happen is that first knowledge base will disappear in contrast. So that's the only real major kind of concern that I've seen at a personal level that could stray a brand new user into either frustration or unexpected results. And I think the easiest way through that is to baseline your problem statement and to baseline your expected outcome. Does that answer the question? I know
Okay.
that might be a little bit
Yeah.
in the cloud. To be very hyper specific from a technical perspective, when you
Yes.
go to these AI models, you're going to be prompted to kind of log in, create an account, and that account is going to store information for you. And then within there, what it's going to do essentially is it's going to take this information and allow you to engage with it in some way. And it's conversational in nature. And that the way in which your conversation can happen is you can talk to it. You could literally like turn on your microphone and you can talk to it, or you can go through and you can text to it, and then it's going to give you a text output, or alternatively an image output, or in this case where we're kind of heading is an enhanced PDF. So it is simply just a tool in a toolbox, and but it's just a very complex tool, and it has a lot of different parameters that can lead it into a different dimension of value.
Okay. All right. We got a lot of questions rolling in. Are you guys ready? Okay.
Sure.
Any guidance on using these tools for interactive maps?
So right now it is actually set. It's trained, and maybe we didn't expressly say that, but it is trained to withstand digital applications as well. So if you have say an Esri map that is hosted in an online environment, there's going to be a default amount of ADA compliance already built into it from a service provider. So that's generally kind of handled to a threshold. And really, when we look at the history of ADA as a whole, web developers did a very good job at encouraging ADA compliance. So you have a lot of really good value from a digital perspective right now, where the gap that we saw is certainly at the application level and the paper level. But all that being said, you could still take a screenshot of your map product, and you can load it into this particular model, and it will give you those recommendations as well. And it'll acknowledge that it's a web application and not, in fact, a map-based product. So
Okay.
if you're sitting there, you could screenshot your map right now. You could drop it in, and it'll make recommendations.
Okay. Somebody asked if we could put the link to the QR code, so I'm getting ready to send that to everybody, and I will include it in the follow-up email. They want the link to the QR code as opposed to the QR code. Somebody asked, are these Fed map approved? Federal map approved? She's having
I'm
some
not
problems typing.
okay. Yeah, I'm
FEDRAMP approved.
FedRAMP. Well, no. So I don't know that there's any real approval authority. This what we've seen in as we've kind of consistently kind of looked at this particular problem is that there's no real specific um, authority on it. And because of that, and I understand what FedRAMP is, but because of that, it's really difficult to act on behalf of that particular standard. All we can say, I think, that is appropriate to guide everybody is that I don't have a clear answer as to if it would be FedRAMP approved. We could certainly evaluate it, but more specifically, what we've done is we've taken industry standard as far as we believe we can for this particular problem, but we're very open-minded if anybody has recommendations for where we can make enhancements and improvements.
Can you please explain again the purpose and process of base map damping for ADA compliance?
Sure. So, in base map dampening, it draws focus on the area of interest rather than outside areas. So, what we tend to do for our map products is reduce kind of extra noise essentially from surrounding areas. So, we just focus on what's within the boundary and what's within the area of interest, so we can further enhance like our color contrast for specifically in this instance the development that is being called out, because when our base maps are a little bit too dark, they kind of, no matter what the color contrast is, it kind of just blends in and makes it hard to distinguish which area of the map you should be looking at. So that's kind of the purpose that we've been using in dampening our base maps, just to focus and draw interest on certain areas.
Okay. Can you get back to the original knowledge base if it diverged?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best way to do that is to just refresh your web page or start a new conversation. So I get, well, to answer your question, no, there isn't a way. You have to basically restart.
Okay.
But
Can you put
on,
up,
and maybe, sorry, just to add to that, on restart, you're going to default back to the base knowledge of the model.
somebody asked if you could put up the slide with the compliance dates and law references. I would like everybody to know, if you go into the materials tab, the button, you can download this presentation that includes that slide, but Amelia is going to put that up while we go to the next question. Okay, how do you suggest doing quality control when using this tool? I've heard varying things about how much you can trust outputs from AI tools.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a general rule, I would never accept AI to do the work on your behalf currently. This could very well change over time, but there's a certain amount of intuition that will kick in where something just doesn't feel right. It kind of doesn't pass the smell test, as the term would be. And in that instance, you would want to kind of refine and iterate yourself through that particular pass. That being said, there is an expectation that over time and the growth of the technology will improve the overall knowledge base, which can increase the reliability. But with all technology, you do want to kind of ensure that you're using your knowledge base to drive towards the product that you're expecting with the expected outcomes that you're wanting to see from it. So, I mean, when we look at the way we've trained this particular model, we've used cartographic standards, we've used peer-based standards, we've looked at and compared and contrasted against what exists from industry, what is the best kind of, what if we were to kind of put a shining star in the sky, what would that then look like? And we've made sure to integrate a lot of those elements to capture and make sure that that knowledge base is there. But all of that being said, it may not be exactly where you need it to land, so you would then have to kind of refine and iterate yourself through that particular challenge.
I just wanted to mention something about the previous question too, really fast about the dates. So these dates as they stand, and you can look more into it if you go to these regulations. These dates are just for public information that's going to be going out after that date, like on that date and after. So anything that's pre-existing public notifications, public information on a government website does not need to become ADA compliant. Those could remain where they are if they were published before these dates. It's really just referring to going forward. So anything pre-existing at the moment doesn't have to change.
Okay, that's a good footnote. Yes, and a very probably cost-effective one too. um, do you have any concerns about promoting the use of AI tools with the increased concern about the environmental impact of AI systems like ChatGPT due to the large quantities of water needed to cool the servers?
Yeah, certainly. So a bit of background, just so everybody's kind of on the same page, knowledge base wise. AI is incredibly resource intensive. Generally speaking, we do have like real raw metrics on the calculation as an industry for every question you may ask. So I mean, it does put into question, do you see value in maybe asking it to calculate out something very silly like 1 + 1? It's almost a complete waste of energy. It's a net negative backwards. So yeah, there certainly is. There's a question around sustainability. There's a question around resource consumption, and certainly there's a question around practicality and consumability natures, or the nature of consumability within the particular AI world. Um, there is, I think, a larger, broader statement and conversation that should occur amongst peers to drive towards what we, communally agree to the value out of the particular product that we're looking at, right? Like we do have a value proposition in any given product, or we have to evaluate against the cost versus the benefit of it. And those costs and benefits are always going to be dynamic. So it really is a tool. It's available. Generally speaking, I could tell you the raw metrics of the usability of this. It's not really a high consumer product as it sits right now. With say around 200 to 400 queries against it as it sits currently, and we're using it regularly to enhance it. But it's a very good question. I think it's a broader question that needs to be evaluated. But what I would encourage is for everybody to consider that when they're making a question. So the more you iterate, the more you're consuming those resources. The less you iterate, the less you're consuming those resources. Over time, there will be some practical implementation, I'm sure, which will reduce that. Largely, that's the terms of technology over time. But right now, given the information we know, it's certainly an evaluation you may need to make at an individual level.
How are privacy and or security concerns handled when uploading a map to AI? Where could this information show up around the globe?
Certainly, and another very good question, and this is oddly enough. So we've kind of discussed this topic, and myself, I've had a couple of conversations around like webinar-driven conversations around AI, and they all kind of lean in this direction as well, which is like, what's the security level of it? In this particular instance, this tool, because we've self-trained it, is self-contained, so it creates only inside of its own environment because it is controlled by us kind of creating guardrails on it. All of that being said, we don't have access to the background information. So if you upload an image, I'll never see it in my life. It's just simply meaning that it's not going to break those guardrails and go into the larger ecosystem of large language models.
What base maps would you recommend for dampening?
So the base maps that we currently use are the aerials. So that's the example that we showed. We have the aerials for each of the counties. So for that's Broward County, and they're just tile image layers that are downloadable from like their open data sources, I believe, right, Matt? Is it from open data? Yeah. So we just use those as our base map because they tend to be the most up to date for that year, typically more than whatever base map ESRI typically has on hand. Those aerials, if specifically for cities that are developing pretty rapidly, they're more up to date. So we tend to use the aerials.
Okay, that's it for the questions. Last chance for questions. Anybody else has a follow-up? Well, I'd like to thank our presenters today for their time and their expertise. As somebody who is not a trained planner, I learned a lot and I was taking notes. But I am going to be sending up a follow-up email to the recording of this webinar and to the resources as well as the AICP CM number. Matt and Amelia, do you have any signing off final words?
Thank you guys
Sorry,
for.
emails are.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. It's
Sorry,
okay.
Matt.
I was gonna say
Yeah,
our contact emails are there.
yeah. Feel free to reach out to us with any questions if you didn't want to say them during this presentation.
All right, that sounds good. Thank you, everybody. And for those of us up here in the Northwest, bundle up. All right, have a good day and have a good weekend. Thank you.